We are continuing in our series called Adam and Eve. Now, I want to give you the same disclaimer that I've given for a few weeks now. This is not a series about the age of the earth, so don't worry. It's not a series about creation even. We actually started after the creation account. This is a series about Adam and Eve, because Adam and Eve's story has a lot to teach us, and I think we've seen that already. So, as we move into it, what I want to do is kind of give us a little bit of a recap to kind of talk about what we've seen so far, some of the things that we've talked about in the past weeks. So here's what we saw in the first week. We talked about being created in the image of God. And what you'll remember about that is that a huge part, maybe the main part of being created in the image of God has to do with the fact that we're made to be in relationship. Now that includes relationship with each other, but definitely relationship with God. It's a huge part of what it means to be created in the image of God. And then what we saw that image included for us and for Adam and Eve and by proxy us, because we come from Adam and Eve, we descend from them, is that relationship is kind of three parts that we saw in the second chapter there. And it was to serve, enjoy, and obey. And so this relationship with God, we are designed to serve Him, to take care of what He's given us. For Adam and Eve, it was the garden. And each of us kind of has our own circle of influence that God has kind of given to us to sort of take care of. And we feel very satisfied when we do the kind of work that He's given us. And so that's kind of the first thing that relationship has to do with when we're thinking about God, is to serve. But then also to enjoy. You'll remember God said, you can eat from any of the trees of the garden. I mean, it was just an enjoyable place. We saw there that it was not only good for eating, that the trees were not only good for eating, but they were good for viewing. It was a beautiful place. And so God designed this world for us to enjoy, and also that we would enjoy relationship with Him. Not just each other, but also with Him. So relationship with God has to do with serving Him, also enjoying Him. But we also saw in that first part of the story that God wants us to obey Him. You'll remember He said that you can eat from all of the trees, save one. There's one that you should not eat. And so there is an aspect of a relationship with God that has to do with obedience, that we would obey Him. And so our most satisfied sort of situation, our most satisfied life is going to include these three things. So that was what we saw in the first week. And then we also saw in the first week, now that I'm, see it up here, we also learned, and this is maybe new for some of us, is that it's not just Eve that was the helper, but Adam was a helper too. They were to help each other grow in this relationship that God had designed them. And so this idea that men are in charge and women are just supposed to help, that I think is challenged by this story, because it tells us that Eve was a helper comparable to Adam. They were to help each other. Adam had a role and Eve had a role, and it was a mutual helping relationship. I think it was a really beautiful image of that first relationship between a man and a woman. Then the Lord, God, called to Adam and said to him, "Where are you?" Do you remember this from last week? We talked about the moment when Adam and Eve fell off the wagon, so to speak. They kind of went off the reservation, not physically yet, that will happen soon, but they sort of lost their way. They were deceived by the serpent, and they went down a path that they should not have gone down. And Eve ate the fruit. What we saw is that Adam was not free of guilt. They were there together. So this idea, I've heard usually it's men that say this. Many men say, well, if Eve hadn't eaten the fruit, the way you should finish that sentence is Adam would have. So, it was destined, maybe not destined. It was not destined. It was just, they were there together. It was a team effort. They sinned together. It was not just Eve's fault. Now we're going to see today, they're going to kind of play the blame game, but what we find is that they were both guilty. They were both there together. And then there's this beautiful image of God coming down and walking in the cool of the morning. We think maybe that's what God and Adam and Eve did together together. That was maybe part of their relationship. And so God comes down, He's walking in the garden, and about that time, Adam and Eve realize that they're naked and they're ashamed, and they begin the first seamstress business. They make a fig leaf sort of bikini or something, I don't know. They cover themselves up, and they go and they hide in the garden. And God comes, being omniscient, He says, Adam, where are you? I mean, a really interesting thought that God, who knows exactly where Adam and Eve are, calls out to them like a loving parent would, where are you? He doesn't say, where are you? I'm going to get you, Adam. You messed up my garden. He wants to restore that fellowship, that relationship. And you remember last week we talked about that idea that God came to them. While they were hiding, while they were divided, God came to them and came to restore that relationship with them. But, as we're going to find today, there are always consequences when we go down the wrong path. God wants to have a relationship with us. We saw last week that He's calling us to life and to fellowship. But that does not mean that we're free of the consequences when we choose things that are not good for us. So, He said, I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. So who's speaking here? This is Adam. Adam is responding to God. So we're picking up right where we left off last week. God says to Adam, where are you? And apparently he comes out from behind the tree. I'm assuming Eve comes out too. And this is the posture I imagine him taking. Well, you always see that in the old Leave It to Beaver sort of shows. He's ashamed. Notice what he says. I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself. Now, how many times had God been in the garden, and Adam had been naked, and so had Eve, and this never came up? Never came up. Hey, man, we need some clothes. That was not, we literally don't know how many times God was in the garden, but we think often. They had a relationship. And this was never an issue. And suddenly, Adam is hiding. He's divided from his wife now. We'll see that in today's passage. And he says to God, I was naked. And I hid myself. So he's feeling the shame. And we begin to see the change that has happened in the world. What a beautiful sort of honeymoon state that they were in, that there was no shame, there was no fear, and now things have really changed. And he said, who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree which I commanded you that you should not eat? Now, once again, remember, God is omniscient. And anytime He asks a question, He knows the answer. So what we have to remember is there's a reason why God asks questions in Scripture. He never asks a question that He doesn't know the answer to. And so in the same way that we might ask questions of our children, of whom we already know the answer. I do this all the time with Eiley, especially. She's my 4-year-old. And Eiley, did you eat that cookie? I know she ate the cookie. I just want to hear her say it because I know there's something cathartic. There's something value about admitting it. There's something value even in our relationship about us coming clean with each other, confessing what happened. And what we notice is that when we confess, we see this in 1 John, for instance, when we confess, that is a restoration of our fellowship with God. When we kind of get out of sync with God and our fellowship is not quite right, one of the things that 1 John tells us to do, it's in 1 John 1:9, he says, confess your sins and I'll forgive you. He's not talking about salvation there. He's talking about on a daily basis. Man, when you mess up, just tell me. Just admit it. And when you admit it, man, I'll wipe it clean. And then we can have this fellowship. And I believe that's what God is initiating here. Now, there's going to be some consequences that they have to go through. But at the same time, remember, God has come down to them. And I think He's come down to restore that fellowship that just got broken. So who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you that you should not eat? We know that He knows. But He's giving Adam a chance to be the honorable, brave man, to take responsibility and say, this garden that you gave me was an amazing gift and I was taking care of it and I take responsibility for what happened. That's what we expect, right? Because Adam is the first man. I mean, we expect him to be so honorable. Let's see what he does. Then the man said, the woman who you gave to be with me, she gave me the tree and I ate. I think I misread that. She gave me of the tree and I ate. I mean, the very first thing after they sinned, basically, they've had a few interactions and they made the leaf thing that they're wearing, but the first conversation, they're blaming each other. Now, I'm just going to be honest with you. I had a blame game last night, and I did not act the way I should have last night. I want to tell you about it because I told you that there's a little of Adam and Eve in all of us, and I see myself in this line. So we were in Chicago yesterday and through most of the week, my wife and I, because we were doing the GES regional conference up there. And so we flew back last night, and we got back home at about 3 a.m. And so I dropped my wife off at her parents' where the kids were. She was just going to sleep there, right? And so I just went home to check on the cat, make sure the house didn't burn down or whatever. And I walk in, and the first thing that I see is that the door to the garage is closed. Now you say, well, that's no big deal, right? Well, yeah, we have a cat, and he lives in the house, and there's a little cat door that he can get out to his litter box in the garage. So if that door's closed, and we've been gone for 4 days, that door's closed. So if you see what I'm saying, smells interesting in here. And so I have this memory of standing in that laundry room, staring at that door, saying, I probably should block that door so it doesn't get closed. But then I said to myself, no, there's no way that door will get closed. It never closes. It's a good door. It'll stay open. The cat can't close it. And so I didn't do anything. So the first thing that I did is I started saying, who came in our house? Now, this is not totally impossible. We have a keypad on our house, and our family who lives in the neighborhood can come in our house. Some of the lights were on, and the thermostat was not what I thought I set it to. So I made up this scenario that somebody came in the house and closed the door to the garage and made our cat pee on all of our stuff. And he just had a heyday. He just had a great time. And so there I am at 3 a.m. scrubbing the floor. And then, Krista came down this morning. She had more to clean up. And I'm sitting there just blaming. I'm blaming somebody, and I'm not sure who it is. Maybe it's Grandpa. He came down here, or it's Grandma, or it's the kid's aunt, or I don't know. And now, as I've calmed down and I'm no longer scrubbing the floor, I'm thinking, I probably did it. I mean, just honestly, the most logical thing is that it's my fault, and I don't know. Maybe somebody came in the house, maybe a robber, because the most nefarious thing that someone could do is come and close the cat in the house. They didn't steal anything. They're like, I was going to steal the TV, but instead, I'm going to make your cat do his business on your clothes. So, anyway, the reason why I tell you that is I have this camaraderie with Adam in this, because it's so natural for me to be looking around like, who did this? And you messed up my garden. You messed up my happy place. I just want to be in bed. I wanted to lay down. And my first instinct is to blame. And that's Adam's first instinct. And what it makes me think is that before the moment where Adam had sinned, I don't think this would have been his instinct. I think his instinct would have been very honorable. I think his sinless nature before the fall would have been to take responsibility when there was a mistake. I think that's what he would have done. But now his sinful nature, remember last week, it causes us to divide and to hide. And is that not what he's doing? He's dividing from his wife. He's saying, no, we're different. She caused this. So I want to distance myself from her. Because, man, she really messed up. And now, I messed up a little, but, man, she really messed up. Is that not what sin does? It breaks our fellowship. It pulls us apart. It separates us both from each other and from God. So Adam points the finger. And the Lord God said to the woman. Now, what's interesting is God doesn't chastise him for that. God knows what he's doing. He's blaming somebody else. But God just turns to the woman. What is this you have done? The woman said, the serpent deceived me and I ate. So Adam passes it on to Eve, and then Eve points her finger at the serpent. Now, nobody's wrong here exactly, because they're describing what actually happened. They're not lying. But there was a different way this could have played out, But now Eve is pointing to the serpent. Now we're going to look at what God says to the serpent next week. And he speaks to the serpent first. But what I want to do is I want to focus today on what God says to Adam and Eve, because that's kind of our focus. And so what we've got to see here is they both sort of blame someone else. They're trying to look. The shame is so intense. I'm making some assumptions here that the shame is so intense. They're trying to find a place to hide. And not physically, but here sort of emotionally. They're looking for a place to just get out of the bright, shining sun that is God's stare. He's looking at them saying, what have you done? Why did you do this? And they want to get out of it. And we find these words in John where Jesus says that the light has come into the world, but man loves darkness. And they run from the light. He's talking about believers and unbelievers alike. And I think that's what we're seeing here. They're seeing the very first inklings of this, that when sin comes in and God arrives, and for us it's Jesus. When Jesus comes into our understanding and our perception, what we often do is we kind of want to just shrink away. We kind of want to move away from it. Let's see what happens. To the woman, he said, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain, you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he will rule over you. So there's kind of two parts to this. There's two pieces that I want to kind of break down here. And so the first part, he says, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain, you shall bring forth children. Man, boy, he really knows how to get to the heart of it. It's like, what can you imagine in life that is more of, we're going to use the word curse today, and we'll kind of talk about what that means, but can you think of something that's more difficult than childbirth? Kidney stone. I've heard kidney stone is, and trust me, what we're talking about today includes kidney stones on the other side of it. We'll see that kind of in a minute. So, childbirth and other pains, we'll put other pains in this category. Can we imagine something that is more difficult than going through physical pain? And it raises this question, why? Why did God have to do this? Why did God have to curse? And I'm using the word have to, because there is a reason for it. It's in the text, and I've rarely ever heard anybody talk about it. We'll see it in a few minutes. But I want to ask this question as we go through this. Why did God curse? Why did God curse them? Why couldn't he just let them be? They're now in a sinful state. They will someday die, but they're still in an amazing place. They could have lived out a pretty wonderful life without much trouble. And God descends, wanting to restore fellowship, and as part of that process, he throws this curse at them. And the first one is this, that pain in childbirth. You recognize this? Anybody identify with this? I don't see any men's hands in the air. I guess that makes sense. So for our two kids, we did C-sections. We did C-section. It was not involved. I did not do the C-section. I was present. And in some ways, I felt relieved about that because it stresses me out to think of my wife in pain. But we still had a really traumatic experience when Eiley was born. I probably have talked about this. I'll kind of explain briefly. So the birth was fine, but when she came out, she looked like a purple popsicle. She was just really deprived of oxygen, and her blood sugar was really low. And so they rushed her to the NICU almost immediately. And man, that was a terrible feeling, watching our baby go down the hall, and then she had to be in the NICU for a couple of days, and they had tubes and wires on her and all this stuff. And I'm sure all of us have had certain experiences like that with children that is just so frightening. Now here's the thing that we got to remember. We are living in an amazing age where most babies survive. The child mortality rate has become so low because of modern medicine, but the ancient world, and the world really up until just very recently in history, experienced child death constantly. If you had 6 kids, half of them were probably not going to make it. It's just how it was. And so when we talk about pain in childbirth, we're not just talking about the physical pain. We're talking about all of the trouble that comes with bringing a life into the world. It isn't easy, and it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt physically, but it's also going to hurt anybody that's involved in some way, especially before the modern age. But even now, all of modern medicine has not really softened the blow of pain when things like that happen. So the thing is, this is what we want, right? This image of a happy mother with a happy baby. And you know what? Some of the time, this is what happens. I mean, a lot of the time, this is what happens. We love having our kids. We didn't get to be with our kids for the last half of the week while we were at this conference. It was really fun to see them this morning. They came running in the house. I mean, it was a great moment. It was just really exciting to see them again. And so a lot of the time, it's really great. But what God does is He mixes this pain in with it. He mixes this difficulty, this curse in with it. And I'll ask you the question again, why? Why did He have to do that? Why did He make the world go through this and still is going through this curse, this pain? It's an amazing thing. We'll see in a minute. The second part of what He says to Eve, and by the way, I think the curse for Eve, it involves Adam too, and we'll see that really quite a bit in this one. She says, "Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." Now, this is a really kind of mysterious sort of thing. Now, anybody that's married, it's probably a little less mysterious, but it's still sort of mysterious. And I think we need to kind of define what he's talking about here. And so we see the word, "your desire shall be for your husband." Now, a lot of people just assume that means that you'll want to be with him intimately, but I actually don't think that's what it means. We see this word a little, not too long after this in Genesis, actually I think it's just a chapter later. Oh, it's in the same chapter. She says, So your desire shall be for your husband. Now notice in Genesis 4, which is the next chapter, he's talking to Cain here, and he says, sin, its desire is for you. So what would that mean? Well, in Cain's case, what God was saying, this is God speaking to Cain, He's saying sin wants to control you. Right? I mean, because Cain had this desire to do this evil thing, to kill his brother, and God says, sin's desire is for you. And so it's sort of personifying the sin. Now, the sin is inanimate. I mean, it's something you're going to do. But He kind of looks at it as if the sin is an entity, or almost an evil person who desires to have control over you. Now, that's just one chapter later, so I think it's safe to say when God is speaking to Eve and says, your desire will be for your husband, I think we can just say, well, it's probably the same thing. I mean, it's only one chapter apart. So what would that mean in the case of Eve and having her desire for her husband? I think what it's saying is, you're going to want to control your husband. In the same way that sin wants to control you, you're going to want to control your husband. But then it says, and he shall rule over you. How frustrating of a situation can you possibly imagine? That you want to control the situation and you're being controlled. Now, here's what I think about this, and I feel pretty strongly about this, that this is a two-way street. Because although, especially in the ancient world, men were just physically more powerful, and they would, and I suppose this is true today, but they were it was easy for a man to be very dominant. I mean, it just was kind of the way of the world. Now, I'm not saying that's right. I think, what I've seen in the modern world is much nicer, but in the ancient world, there was a lot of dominance. There was a lot of ruling, a lot of mistreating of women. And so what I think I'm seeing here is maybe what we would just call tension. And in the modern world, it still happens, but in the ancient world, it happened a lot as well. And so basically what God is saying here is, you're going to want to control your husband, and he's going to want to control you. And a lot of the time, he is going to control you. And you're not going to like it. But here's the thing, Adam is not going to like his side of this bargain either, because it's tension, it's conflict, it's frustration in relationship. And remember what we said, that sin divides us. And this is ultimately what he's getting at. You need fellowship with one another, but you're going to find it difficult. It's not going to be breezy. It's going to be hard because you're going to want to control each other. Now, here's the thing. Adam and Eve were the only people on the planet at this point. So can we extend this out? And I would say absolutely we can extend this out. Because this is talking about a marriage relationship, but is everybody married? Obviously not. But everybody feels this part of the curse. I want to control my children. My children would love to control me. I want to control my neighbors. I wish they would mow their yard. They would love to control me, I'm sure. I don't know what they'd want me to do. Probably stop mowing over their daisies. I want to control other people. We want to control. Even governments, countries want to control other governments in other countries. And what happens when they do that? It's called war. The world is in this tense tension. And much of it comes down to this curse. Because we want to control each other. And for Eve, the curse is that she'll want to control her husband. She'll want to control other people, just like Adam will want to control other people. This is not just a curse on Eve. It's just the one that God speaks to Eve. Because what's close to Eve's heart, I think, is what's close to so many of our hearts, is quality relationship. And He's saying, you will find quality relationship, but it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard work. He says, your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Anybody identify with this? But you know what we really want? We want this, we want, and a lot of time, this is what we get. We get peace and we get harmony. But I'll tell you, last night, I was texting my wife in all caps. And that was not good for our relationship. For those of you that don't know, that means that I'm yelling. And I was in the house and I was not acting good. I was yelling at the cat, but I felt it's not your fault, it's somebody else's, I was not acting good. Now, we're happy today. She's smiling now, so I think we're okay. This is what we want. We want peace, we want harmony, but so much of the time we find tension, we find conflict. Once again, I want to ask you the question, why did God do it? Could He have left it the way it was and said, you know what, there'll be no curse. There'll be no curse on your relationships. You're not going to have these tension conflicts where you're trying to control each other. Could He have left it that way? I think He could have. But there's a good reason why He didn't. Before we find out what that good reason is, we're going to see what He says to Adam. Then to Adam He said, because you have heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it. Now, this is one long sentence, but let me just kind of break down what He's saying here. He's saying, okay, so Adam, you blamed your wife, but let me remind you, who did I give the commandment to? I gave it to you. And in fact, if you go back and read, God gives it specifically to Adam. And then it seems to me that it's Adam's job to then kind of inform Eve of that, because she comes along a little bit later. And so Adam is sort of the keeper of the law, so to speak. I mean, he's the one, he's supposed to be the marshal in town. And he's the one that gets involved in this breaking of the only law. And so it's like Adam, yeah, you blamed her, and I get it. She was involved. But man, I gave you the rule. You're the rule keeper. You should have been on top of this. Notice where he goes with it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it in all the days of your life. And I feel this one. Literally I feel it, because I have a lot next to my house that was let to just go wild. And for the last few years I've been trying to clean it up. And if that's all we saw as the curse, I think we'd be missing it. Because for those in the ancient world, it was a very physical kind of work that they did. They were an agrarian culture. They had to grow their own food. We don't quite live in that, but I bet every single one of us has had a bad day at work. You ever had a work that you had to do that you just didn't want to do? It was just difficult. It was just frustrating. Sometimes it's because of other people, but sometimes it's just physically, it's hard. This is part of this curse that God brings on Adam, but really on all of us. Because it's not like all the men have a hard time working, but women never have problems at work. Any of you ladies ever had problems at work? Yeah, obviously. So this curse is not just for Adam, it's for mankind. So, both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat of the herb of the field. It makes me wonder, what was it like before this? Because Adam was in charge of kind of taking care of the garden, would he just say to a berry bush, I'd like you to grow bigger berries, please? I don't know. How did he garden if it wasn't by working and toiling? I'm not even sure. but apparently was blissful, apparently was fun to do the work that he had. Now, there will be some fun, but it's going to be mixed in with the pain. And I feel that in the work that I've had throughout my life. Almost every job I've had, there are lots of things about it that I like, but there's always a few things about it that aren't pleasant, that aren't good. And once again, I would say, why did God do it? Why couldn't he have left work? Just leave work alone. I'll take the conflict with my wife, whatever, but leave my job alone. I just want to be happy somewhere. And if you think about it, it's like he's sort of turning every corner of life into something where we're going to be reminded of this curse. He goes on, in the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return. Boy, God is really morbid here. I mean, he really just lets him know what's going on. I mean, this is your plight in life now. This is what you've chosen. This is the path. And you remember, God told him that there's consequences. If you go down the other path, you will surely die. And now he's explaining how it's going to happen physically. Now, he didn't die physically the moment he ate. We know that something happened spiritually. But now God is affirming that, yes, there is a path for you, and you will return to the dust. And there's an irony in this. He said, for all of your life, you're going to work the ground. You're going to try to grow stuff. It's going to feed you, but it's going to be hard work. And by the way, if you ever were to just go out into the woods and try to feed yourself by what's there, just try it sometime. It is hard work to survive out on the land. And so this is what Adam and Eve are facing. They're about to have to go out. They're about to have to figure out how to feed themselves. And then the irony, into the dark irony, is that ground that you hoe and you sow, you're going to be buried in it. I mean, there's consequences. And so what we see here is that part of the curse is physical death. Now, could he have left that alone? I mean, I'll ask the same question. Could he have left that alone? Could he have said, I'm just going to let you continue to live? I mean, God could have done that. I'm just going to let you continue to go on and have a life, as is. He could have done it. But he brought in all of these things, all of these curses for a reason. Cursed is the ground. And so much more. So much more. I don't know if it occurs to you, but it occurs to me that there are a lot of problems in the world. A lot of things that are just physical disasters, tornadoes. But then at the same time, there's these beautiful places. And we much rather would go to a national park where there's a lake and a mountain than to where the tornado is. Although there are people that, they armor their cars and they go drive into tornadoes, and there's probably some fun to that. But for the most part, we want to run from the tornado, we want to run from the curse, and we want to run to something beautiful. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. It's hard. We're going to work, and I think it's probably easier in some ways for us than it was for Adam and Eve because of modern technology. I mean, it's amazing what we have, but it's still hard work, and we still find this toil. And what I see in the world today is that there are many things that we don't find painful anymore, but we find plenty of other things to find pain in. And so if it's not in toil, it's in our relationships. And God has covered both of those. This makes me think of what work is like for a lot of us, right? I mean, not everybody has a job that they just absolutely love. Sometimes we have a job that we just absolutely hate. It's part of the curse. Whatever it is that we've got to do, we face this curse based on the path that we followed. But this is what we want, right? We want satisfaction. And once again, I'd say, why did God do it? I mean, couldn't he just left work alone? Couldn't he said, I'll let your work just be happy. You have enough trouble. I'll let your work be happy. And he doesn't do it. And he has a reason for it. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return. Life is tough. I've had, I think, more people than is normal die that has been close to me. Coming up through school, I had a number of friends die. I had 2 different friends on the drum line that I was on pass away, totally unrelated. One guy had a wreck. He was a sophomore. And then another guy who's a junior, was a big guy, football player-sized guy, had a heart attack in the line at Six Flags on a band trip. And they put him in an ambulance. And the last thing that his band friends saw of him was him screaming in pain as they carried him away, and he died. I mean, it's like a 16-year-old kid. Why did God do it? I mean, we face this kind of stuff, and this isn't what we want, right? We want it to be different. And it's easy to look at these kind of things that we see and say, God, what are you doing? Are you sure you know what you're doing? Because what we want is something like this, something happy, something breezy. And if there were two paths out of the Garden of Eden, and Adam and Eve were given a choice, they said, okay, look, you see the hospital bed? You can either go that way, or you can go to the beach. What would they have chosen? Well, of course they would have chosen the beach, but they would have been missing something. There's something that they would miss. So what's wrong with the world? Why is it this way? It's under the curse of our sin. Why did God pronounce the curse? You know, what's interesting to me is Adam and Eve, if they had been left alone, it seems to me that they would have been able to continue their life, and it would have been a really great life. I mean, we live with sin, right? And we can still manage to eke out a pretty sweet gig. I mean, you know, I'm really enjoying my life, and I live with the curse of work that's tough, and the curse of having conflict and tension. I live with the curse of knowing that I'm going to die someday, and my life is still really great. Think about how much greater Adam and Eve's life could have been even after they sinned. I mean, it wasn't suddenly bad. Imagine that God said, you know, you shouldn't have done that, but I'm just going to leave you alone. What would have happened to them? They could have lived out their, you know, the Bible tells us like in the 900-year range, they would have lived out their existence thinking, you know, this ain't that bad. But what they would have been missing is understanding what they needed. Because there is a more real experience underneath all of the surface that it's easy to kind of just gloss over. Cursed is the ground, notice what's in yellow there, for your sake. This is what God says. He doesn't say cursed is the ground because I'm mad at you. He doesn't say cursed is the ground because you've got to pay the piper. He says, I'm going to curse the ground for your own good. This is for your benefit. You know, when I first saw this was new to me. I've been reading these verses for years and years, and it never stuck out to me that God says all of this trouble, the death, the pain, the conflict, the tension, the difficulty in work, it's all for your benefit. It's all for you. I'm doing it not because I hate you, but because I love you. And man, that's beginning to me to sound like a loving parent who sometimes allows their children to face some difficult circumstances for a very important reason. I think we begin to see it when we think about these things in life that are so difficult. Why did He do it? For your sake. The curse is a constant reminder, a constant reminder of how much we need Jesus. Man, if we didn't have the curse, it's possible we would just cruise on through and never slow down to think, man, I need something. I need something deeper than just this physical experience. I need something deep down because there's something broken inside of me. And if the curse was not here, we could probably just overlook the brokenness. We could probably just say, man, life is so great. I'll just let it ride. And so it's a constant reminder. We see it in John 3:16. I mean, this is probably one of the most clear. We could quote it all together, but notice what I have highlighted there. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish. You see, this is what the world is facing. We need life. We need fellowship with God. Now those come at separate points. We get life in a moment when we believe, and then we begin to grow, and we begin to grow in our fellowship and the abundance of our life. But the world is facing this awful situation of perishing. And it's the curse that proves this verse. It's the curse that shows people that they need Jesus. Now imagine that Adam and Eve were never experienced the curse and you showed them John 3:16. They would say, yeah, I don't know, perishing doesn't sound that bad. My life's great. But there is not a single person I've ever shown John 3:16 to that wouldn't agree that, man, there's stuff that's hard. And it drives me towards wanting to get answers, especially when we begin to think about death. You know, every person that has gotten old enough to realize it realizes that someday we're going to face that last breath. And that's part of the curse. And God built that into our system so that we could look at it and say, well, I'm going to need some help here. I need help. I need a Savior. That is the purpose of the curse. The curse is a constant reminder of how much we need Jesus. Now, I love this one because this kind of, again, I feel really related to what Paul says here. He says, "O wretched man that I am, who will deliver me? I thank God through Jesus Christ our Lord." What's going on in this is chapter 7 of Romans. Paul is explaining that, man, I know there's things I ought to do, and no matter how much I want to do them, I mess up, and I can't seem to do what I want to do. And here's the other thing, is the stuff that I don't want to do, the sins, the coveting, the lust, I know I shouldn't do it, I don't want to do them, but I still do them. And then he says, "Who will deliver me?" Notice he doesn't say what will deliver me. He says, who? So there's something about his experience, that tension and that pain and that frustration of living under the curse that has driven him to this question, who's going to deliver me? I mean, he feels it in his life. My life is hard, it's difficult, it hurts. Who's going to deliver me? Who's going to fix this? I mean, this is exactly what we're seeing. The curse drives us to be asking these kinds of questions. Who's going to fix it? Who can fix it? And when we get into that mindset, especially when an unbeliever gets into that mindset, I think that's when the gospel can take hold of a person, is when we begin to understand that, and that's based on the experience that we have. So the curse is a constant reminder of how much we need Jesus. Now, I just want to remind you of this because, again, you may be saying, well, how's this verse connected? But let's just remember that Jesus, when he was teaching his disciples to pray, he taught them to say every day, "Your kingdom come." Now, maybe not literally those words. I think he expects us to kind of expand on it and to be praying about these kind of as a category, as a subject. But he taught his disciples to be constantly looking forward to the day where Jesus would return and he would set up his kingdom on the earth. Now let's just think for a second. Is there going to be a curse in the kingdom of heaven? No. I mean, it's going to be done. There's not going to be a curse in the kingdom of heaven. So he's telling us, look forward to the day when the curse is gone. Look forward to the day when I'll remove the curse. But I'm going to keep the curse in place for those who need to be looking toward that day. So he's instructing us to think about a day when we'll no longer feel the tension and the conflict and the pain and the difficulty in work and the death and the returning to the dust. Look forward to that day. It's an amazing thought. There's going to be a day where this is no more. Now, literally, will there be no tornadoes? I don't know how the kingdom of heaven will work. Maybe tornadoes just won't break stuff. Or maybe we'll love to fix it. Maybe it'll blow up a house. We'll say, oh, that'll be fun to fix. Let's go do that. I don't know. But it's going to be different. It's not going to be under the curse. I don't know what the weather pattern will be, but it'll be different. We won't experience this kind of stuff. We won't experience this. Oh, it's an awful one. I should have taken that one out. I can't hardly even look at it. But we won't experience this either. I don't know if you've ever experienced a lion on your back. It ain't fun. So this will be something that's no longer part of our experience. And so God is asking us to look forward to that day when the curse is removed. But we have to remember that the curse is here right now for a reason. I'm going to get that picture off of there. Yeah, war too. Boy, these are awful. Let me just go forward. See, we don't even want to really, I don't even really want to look at stuff that reminds me of the curse. But it is important for us to remember that God is using the difficulty in the world, the trials that we face, the pain and the suffering to drive people toward the Savior. Now, so many people out there are asking these questions of how could a good God let the world get into the state it's in? The answer is because He loves the world, because He wants to move the world and its people toward Himself. And the thing that does it is pain and suffering. We see it over and over and over. The curse is a constant reminder of how much we need Jesus. Cursed is the ground for your sake.